The Great Salt Lake is on the brink of collapse. It's the story of many terminal lakes around the world, desiccated from a warming climate and water consumption that's out of balance. But Utahns don't need to look far to see why the Great Salt Lake is worth fighting for and what they stand to lose if it turns to dust. Owens Lake, 250 miles north of Los Angeles, has already been through what the Great Salt Lake is now facing. Our multimedia reporting showed the worst-case scenario of a dried-up valley, loss of bird habitat and food, and nearby communities choking on dust. We also showed the work being done to mitigate dust plumes at a cost of $2.5 billion to the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Phil Kiddu has spent 17 years watching Owens Lake transform from an environmental disaster to a place where the birds have returned and the air is finally clear.
You know, the success of the project it actually truly is incredible. You know, to take the largest source in the entire nation, control it, you know, through mechanisms that were developed and studied here at Owens Lake, and then, you know, the cost, which, you know, you put the total price tag at $60.5 billion, which just sounds atrocious and absurd. Pound for pound of emission reductions, it's the cheapest dust control project for fugitive emissions in the entire country.
13 miles east of Yosemite National Park, near Lee Vining, California, lies Mono Lake, a virtual twin to the Great Salt Lake. Both have trillions of brine shrimp, islands for migrating birds, and both are tourist attractions. The public saw where Mono Lake was headed, and a grassroots committee saved it under the public trust doctrine, arguing the state had the duty to protect it. In 1983, the California Supreme Court ruled in Mono Lake's favor. It's a case legal scholars lauded, with some proclaiming it revolutionized Western water law. Despite the California State Water Resources Control Board mandating lake rise in the mid-1990s, Mono has yet to hit its ideal level. What does that bode for Great Salt Lake?
There's a legacy of those excessive diversions that, even though it's not happening today and it wasn't happening yesterday, carries on.
Great Salt Lake. Back at home, it is becoming clear that we can't mitigate what we can't measure. If the Great Salt Lake turns to dust, the pollution can be controlled, but it's going to be exorbitantly expensive. Owens Lake is a fraction of the Great Salt Lake size. The Great Salt Lake Collaborative also needs to move into the community with events and other awareness-raising endeavors. So please consider supporting the collaborative with a contribution today at greatsaltlakenews.org.
The work that we've done as part of the Great Salt Lake Collaborative has brought together news organizations from across the state, educational partners, and other media organizations to help share in the reporting and looking for solutions affecting northern Utah and what we can be doing to find solutions to kind of turn this crisis around at the Great Salt Lake. So we've got an incredible team of reporters and news folks here from the Salt Lake Tribune, Fox 13, and the Deseret News. And I will let each of them introduce themselves to you and what their role has been as part of this collaborative as we get going. And I'm Marcy Young-Cancio. I'm from Salt Lake Community College in Ankleton, Utah.
I'm Leah Larson. I'm with the Salt Lake Tribune, and I wrote a lot of the stories for the project.
I'm Manuel Rodriguez. I'm a special projects photographer for Fox 13 and been with them for a couple years now.
And I'm Spencer Heaps. I'm a photojournalist and photo editor at Deseret News. And the three of us, plus Amy Joy O'Donoghue, are one of our reporters at Deseret News. We're the team that had the pleasure of going to California.
It's a good time.
And so before we kick all of this off, is the audience, are you familiar with the term solutions journalism and what that is? Okay, so solutions journalism is what the Solutions Journalism Network likes to call it, is hope with teeth. This idea that we're reporting on issues and problems, but we're not just reporting the problem, we're also reporting on solutions and approaches to be able to turn things around. It's the idea of, wow, there's this problem, not wow, there's this problem and we're all gonna die, it's horrible, but wow, there's this problem, and what are other communities doing? What is being done to help mitigate this problem, to help give it some hope with teeth, if you will? And so we've thought about it as kind of opening the door to reporting and allowing the reporting to be part of solutions. It doesn't mean it's advocacy journalism. It is fully reported in the same way that you would expect from any other good reporting. But it is bringing a little bit more context to it by learning lessons from other communities and pushing it forward to see what can be done to turn this crisis around at the lake, if you will. It's really pretty innovative what the Solutions Network, the Solutions Journalism Network has allowed through funding this project. The Great Salt Lake Collaborative brings together more than a dozen news organizations from across the state, news organizations that have never collaborated before on projects, news organizations that have seen each other as competitors in the past. That is a way to pool their resources, their talents, and their expertise to do the best possible reporting we can do to consider these solutions being done at the Great Salt Lake. It is truly an incredible feat when it comes to sharing information, to have Fox 13 and ABC4 and the Deseret News and the Salt Lake Tribune and the Standard Examiner coming together in meetings to do this reporting. And so that's what's enabling all of this to happen now. Is there anything that you guys want to say about solutions before we jump into the reporting trip in California?
I think you did good.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect, excellent. So let's kick off then with At Water's Edge. That was the name of this project. And it brought you to California to look at 2 saline lakes that have had some major issues in those communities there. How did this reporting happen?
You look like you have something.
No, it's definitely you.
I think, can you guys hear me? I think, so saline lakes are disappearing all around the world, and I had some people ask, why didn't you go to a bigger lake that's more comparable to the size of the Great Salt Lake? But I wanted to go to these 2 lakes personally because they're our sister lakes where we share geography, we share somewhat similar political systems, so the solutions could be probably better applied. But I think we've all heard a lot about at least Owens Lake and what happened there, and that's what we don't want to happen to the Great Salt Lake, so that was on a lot of people's radar. But I haven't seen a lot about people actually going there and looking at what was done on the ground. It's still a lake, so that's why I
And I'll just interject to say I'm going to show some of my photos as we talk and try to queue up relevant ones. So as we work through this and hear about what's happened at Mono Lake and Owens Lake, this is Mono Lake. It still looks pretty beautiful. Another view of it as we arrived. This is what Owens Lake looks like now. That's one of the areas of the lake that they've mitigated, but a lot of it is gravel and mud. So keep in mind these 2 very different looking outcomes in these connected lakes.
And so with Owens Lake specifically, what happened at Owens Lake? Give us a little bit of a timeline of what Owens Lake experienced, what the impact was in that initial reaction, and why this was a bit of a case study as you did your reporting for this piece of the collaborative. A little bit of background, if you will.
So at the turn of the last century, Los Angeles, the city, was growing pretty rapidly. And I think they found themselves in a situation where we kind of are at today, where they were running out of water and looking afield to see where they could get more to feed their growing city. So they looked hundreds of miles to the north, to the pristine Owens Valley, and started kind of secretly buying up all the water rights, posing as ranchers until they owned just about everything. And because they owned all the land, they owned all the water rights, so they built this big feat of engineering called the Los Angeles Aqueduct, and they piped all that water downhill to Los Angeles on the other, in a whole different geography, took it out of the Great Basin to the city, and Owens Lake dried up by the 20s and then started becoming a pretty significant dust problem by the 80s.
Anything else that you guys want to add?
Nope. That's a good.
So I think as we go through this, an important thing to note is that we have a collection of abilities from a journalistic perspective happening here. We have a reporter, we have photography, we have visual. We have brought together all of the many pieces to help tell a compelling story, both through the written word, through the visuals, and through some interactive work that we've done with some drone footage and putting the whole thing together to try to really bring some visual clarity to the project and to its impact. What is this work journalistically doing in terms of presenting both the risks and the problems and what the solutions can be?
Well, I think I would like to know how the photographer and videographer explored that actually.
Well, there's no substitute for going somewhere, but I think images can be a close substitute and at least get you some of the way there. And I hope that was fun or a useful interjection showing these pictures of Owens and Mono Lake because this was shocking to arrive here and having read about, and having come from Mono Lake first because we traveled south from Reno and you are just outside of Yosemite. I mean, you're getting lunch with where Yosemite climbers and backpackers are dining, and this beautiful lake that people are visiting while they're waiting for their predetermined entry time at Yosemite. It's just stunning, the Eastern Sierra. And then to travel down south, and Owens Lake is largely a construction zone, at least a lot of what we explored. I mean, there's parts of it that have water in it, and as a lover of the West Desert, I love a good dry lake bed too. That's kind of beautiful in its own right. But a lot of it is a big industrial zone with big work trucks from Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. And so to think about that being what the Great Salt Lake could be one day is kind of a scary scenario.
So what are we looking at in this image here?
Yeah, so there's, I think, 7 types of mitigation styles on Owens Lake. And these have been kind of honed over the years by Los Angeles. Was it 94 when they were finally dealt with having to mitigate the effects of the blowing dust on Owens Lake? They've kind of gone through and honed different styles of keeping the dust down. So this in the foreground is called tillage, and they go through with these giant tractors and they till the mud up into big clumps. And
We got the idea from a farmer, right? Yeah.
the idea is that as long as it stays clumped, it doesn't emit dust. This is gravel. Very inspiring original name for this mitigation strategy. They just dump a bunch of gravel. It's the most expensive one of the 7, and surprisingly not the most effective. Doesn't it take quite a bit of upkeep, Leah?
No, actually, that's why LA likes it, and they like it because it doesn't use any water, but it's expensive.
Okay. But it is expensive.
Very expensive. In certain spots, it's not effective. Like if it's next to a sand dune, it will cause problems, but...
Right, because the dust will get trapped in the gravel and then blow out.
Yeah.
Okay.
But LA really likes it because even though it's expensive, it lasts a really long time, but the state of California does not like it because it has no aesthetic values. I think you can see from Spencer's photo.
There's
no wildlife benefits.
Managed vegetation is kind of an interesting area where they've put out sprinklers and they've seeded grasses within them. And then there is shallow flood areas, which is probably the most beautiful area, and it still contributes to the Pacific Flyway. The birds don't really care that it's a construction zone. If there's water down, they're going to enjoy it. There's brine pools and
So
maybe some more.
one thing we learned is that a lake eventually will shrink and it will always have water in it because it just gets too salty to evaporate. So the reason they're only mitigating I think it's like a quarter of the lake bed is because the middle still has water and it has this big salty crust on top. And so they're trying to replicate that in other spots. to kind of cut down on the amount of water they're using to do the shallow flooding. Because while this looks the best, this is what LA likes the least. They would rather be sending all that water to their residents and their customers.
You can still catch a pretty sunrise over the dry Owens Lake bed, though.
Beautiful.
I'm the only one who woke up for it.
That is true. A big thing for me is that I've been doing news photography for a very long time now. I've been doing it for about almost 13 years, and I've been to a lot of things in my life, shocking things, and this was probably one of the biggest things that had like the biggest impact on me, just seeing it in real life. I grew up near Los Angeles originally, and I also grew up in southern Utah. And a quote that Phil Cadieux said, he was in the video, he spent the day with us, the first day at Owens. He said, imagine St. George like sucking up all your water like from the mountains and things like that. And that was like that was actually like when it hit me, like, wow, this is like really real for this town. And that's kind of what like stuck with me for the whole entire time that I was over there. Growing up in California, I've never been to this area before, and growing up near LA, I obviously probably benefited from the water that's been taken from this area, which is really crazy to think. So I think the craziest part is that you can be benefiting from something like this and not even realize the effects that you're having on it. And there's probably a lot of people in Utah that aren't even realizing the effects that all these things that are happening just in our area. We live so close to the Salt Lake, and I'm able to see it almost every day. And seeing it dry up is like really kind of crazy, especially after seeing Owens Lake like this.
So what is the size of Owens Lake compared to Great Salt Lake?
I think it was like, what, one?
It's like, I mean, the lakes are always changing in size, but I think it's like 1/10-ish.
Yeah, 1/10, yeah,
And
that sounds
includes
right.
the dry beds.
I think it's about 110 square
Yeah.
miles
And
is Owens Lake compared to 1,700 square miles.
Great Salt
on
Lake's
Great Salt Lake.
historical average is 1,700. Yeah.
But LA is on the hook to mitigate dust on 48 square miles at Owens Lake. And Great Salt Lake currently has about 800 square miles of dry lake bed.
So let's talk about that then. We've seen successful mitigation strategies for a dry lake bed, these engineered solutions to keep the dust and toxins down. What have we learned in Utah if we get to that level where we have to mitigate 800, how much was it?
800 square miles.
800 square miles. My brain's having a hard time wrapping itself around how big that is. But what have we learned from their engineering strategies that could apply to a project that is much larger on scale? And could they be successful solutions to keeping that dust and those chemicals at bay?
I think we've learned that it's very expensive. They've laid thousands and thousands of miles of pipe at Owens Lake just to get the water to do that shallow flooding. We've learned that water works best, like, believe it or not, like, a lake wants to be wet. So that works the best. But then you have to walk this balance where we also have a growing population, we need water. So what do we value? How do we balance that? We could harden gravel like they did. I think one thing that is really different between Great Salt Lake and Owens Lake, though, is Owens Lake will always be a dry lake as long as the city of Los Angeles is around, probably, but the Great Salt Lake will rise and fall. So maybe we have to introduce some of these mitigated or these engineered solutions to like portions of the lake, maybe for periods of time, it won't be year round like what Los Angeles has to do. But I think, it's useful to know like certain parts of the lake take well to vegetation, and that's relatively cheap. So maybe we should explore something like that. Hopefully we won't have to curtain gravel because that doesn't look very nice. But yeah, I just think we need to have a better understanding of the lake and like which sections of the lake will do better with these various mitigation strategies that Spencer kind of explained. Like that's what we need to start looking at, I think.
Did you want to say something? Oh, I was going to say really quick. The other thing too is that, when it comes to the situation at Owens and Mono Lake is that they have one entity to kind of go to as far as, the lawsuit that happened, which was Los Angeles Water and Power. And for Salt Lake, it's a little bit different. I mean, you kind of have to get a collaborative effort from lots of different, lawmakers and things like that in order to probably make a number of solutions happen all at one time. So that's the other hurdle that I think is going to make it really tough to find just one simple solution. I don't think there, probably is, but.
That's a really good point, and that's something we kept asking the people we interviewed in California was, with Owens and Mona Lake, it's really easy to point to one big, deep-pocketed entity, the city of Los Angeles, and say, you're responsible for this, so you need to pay to fix it. In Utah, we're kind of all responsible for what is happening to the Great Salt Lake, so how are we going to pay for it?
So this is Paul. He's Los Angeles's main dude in charge of the mitigation efforts. And he was, I'd say, gobsmacked when we told him about the size differences between the two.
And how much lake bed was exposed.
And how much lake bed we have that's exposed and already emitting dust. And he's very diplomatic. There's still ongoing litigation. Yeah. They're very corporate speak, careful about what they say. But we pressed him, would you want to come to Utah and be in charge of a project on Great Salt Lake? And through the diplomacy, I think that was a hard no from him.
So this is a good shift to talk about Mona Lake and where it was headed down the same path as Owens Lake, but they were able to jump in and kind of stop it from drying out. It's still an active lake with a lively ecosystem. Tell us a little bit about that. What did they do differently, and what from what they did differently can Great Salt Lake in Utah learn and apply as a solution here at home? And I'm asking all these questions to all of you because I know all of you did this deep reporting from different perspectives in different ways. So I'm going to let you guys find out.
Well, we can tell who the expert is here.
Leah is definitely
help.
Well, you remember the numbers. So Mona Lake, actually, I think it was 1981. I was reading a newsletter advocates for that lake was sending out to all its patrons, and it was actually, it sounded eerily similar to what's happening to the Great Salt Lake today. Like, there were all these dead birds, the brine flies had gone missing, the shrimp weren't doing well. So they organized and they fought back, and they kept trying to sue the city of Los Angeles, and their perspective was sort of that Los Angeles was like, all right, go ahead and try, see how you do. But after years and years and applying various different legal arguments, I guess, they used a public trust doctrine to argue that while the city of Los Angeles has a right to the water because of all the water rights it owned, the state of California also has to maintain the lake for the good of the public. And that prevailed, but it wasn't a win for Mona Lake right away. The state was in charge of figuring out the sweet spot that the lake had a rights to, where Los Angeles could divert water, but also there was still not enough left behind for Mona Lake to sustain itself. And they finally landed on that number, I think, in the 90s. And 30 years later, it still hasn't hit that elevation, but at least they know where they're trying to go. And maybe more litigation is in the wings, we'll see.
As you've seen from the video and the pictures too, I mean, Mona Lake is absolutely beautiful. It's a place that I want to go visit even more after going there. And I'm hoping that when people come to the Salt Lake, they feel the same way. And so, obviously we need to find the solutions much sooner than later.
So these are the tufa formations of Mona Lake, and that's one of the big attractions. They're formed underwater, actually, as fresh water seeps up into the saline lake. There's a chemical reaction that causes these calcium deposits, and it's kind of like a cruel irony that these should all be underwater. So the only reason that this big attraction that people want to go out and view and check out is actually because that lake level is dropped.
Yeah, one thing that really impressed me about Mona Lake actually is the community there has really worked hard. They've captured the fact that they're next to Yosemite, so they have all these tourists passing through. And they have really set up a lot of educational, interactive things to show you just how low the lake is. There's this boardwalk you could take to the water, but as you walk, there's this sign here's how high it was in 1920, here's how high it was in 1950. Yeah. Nice to
I'm good.
Yes, excellent.
And so how is that signage and this sort of education at the lake then translated into what does this mean? This is what the levels were then, this is what this means now. Is there much conversation happening there? And is that something that is being applied in Utah, needs to be applied more in Utah?
Well, they have a really active group of advocates, the Mono Lake Committee. This is Jeff McQuilkin, he's their director. And I think for sure Mono had the advantage of being the second lake that LA went after. So they still had water there. It was still an attractive place in many ways. But the Mono Lake Committee has been very active at generating community support, getting branding out there, stickers, pamphlets, attracting people to their little shop and educational center. So it's clear that the community engagement there made a big difference. And they're also involved in the litigation. So both from a public messaging standpoint and a practical matter of being plaintiffs.
Yeah, I will say that going through a lot of the contemporary documents, the historical documents, and talking to some of these people, it's actually a lot of the people in the city of Los Angeles that are advocating on Mono Lake's behalf. So the education works, I think. At least I think they would argue that it does.
So Great Salt Lake is one of 20 saline lakes across California, Nevada, Oregon, and Utah identified by the U.S. Geological Survey as these priority ecosystems. You guys went to California to look at these two lakes. Is there much being done to look at kind of this broader ecosystem of these 17 other lakes and what can be learned across all of them? Yeah.
I guess there is. Blakemore, our representative in Congress, co-sponsored a bill. It was bipartisan to fund USGS to study these lakes. It was kind of lobbied by Audubon. There's a companion bill still in the Senate, but they're moving forward with some of the studies as we speak. And when I was talking to Marcel Shoup, who is the director of Audubon's Saline Lakes program, she says that she realizes that there's not a lot of comfort in just hearing, like, we're going to do more studies. Yeah, like, people want to see action, but the science actually isn't great on these. And so I think the more you learn, the more you can argue your case and get these things, the wheels turning at the federal and local levels, and you can empower actually local policymakers who really have the most say over the fate of these lakes because they control the water law. You can empower them with information and help them make good decisions.
Well, that's kind of a perfect transition to talk more about collaboration. I mean, what are you seeing when it comes to bipartisan support and work around issues at the lake? Are you seeing bipartisan collaboration from people on both sides of the aisle to bring solutions to the Great Salt Lake?
Well, I would say it's pretty significant that the Speaker of the House for Utah has made this his priority issue. He said this is probably the single most important issue of his political career. So that is a huge shift in tone from even 5 years ago, I would say.
Yeah, I think he went on didn't he go on a helicopter ride or a few of the representatives?
He organized the
helicopter ride, and that for some reason was the big eye opener. I mean, you would think you'd take a flight out of Salt Lake City and you'd see how dry it is, and that would be pretty easy to put together, but that's what it took, and yeah, now it's happening.
How much do you think the reporting of the collaborative has done to get lawmakers more involved and to bring attention to the crisis of the lake?
So much. I think we should get all the credit.
That's the sort of stuff that gets canceled, sir. No, but seriously, what sort of this, I mean, the goal of this reporting is to bring a lot of attention to an issue that had not had a lot of attention brought to it through this widespread collaborative reporting and partnerships with other organizations. Have you seen any sort of, what has the response been? Maybe not just from lawmakers and legislators, but from the community? What has the response been? This has been about a year of work, a little less than a year of work. What have you seen in this time?
You?
Well, I would just say that I've been covering the Great Salt Lake for the better part of a decade, and this is the most I've seen people talk about it. So that alone is a big deal.
Yeah, I feel like more and more younger people are getting in the conversation now, which I think is huge. I think that's going to make a big impact. but it's going to take a lot of people to really speak up to their lawmakers and things like that, and make sure that it's known that this is something that they care about. So yeah.
And in that spirit of collaboration, the Deseret News and the Salt Lake Tribune co-bylined an article for this project. It's not just the sharing of work across news organizations, but when you have two reporters working together on a story with the same byline, what's the significance of that, Leah?
Well, I'm pretty sure it's never been done before, so that's significant. But I just think it shows that this issue is so much bigger than one news organization. It's so much bigger than like maybe the competition we feel. The need to like get the scoop and get the story out first. Like it's so much bigger. Like Deseret News reaches an audience, let's be honest, that the Salt Lake Tribune doesn't, and vice versa. So I think when you open your paper and you see a co-byline by the Salt Lake Tribune and the Deseret News, hopefully that drives it home to people that this is bigger than wherever you lie on the political spectrum or whatever your beliefs are about climate change or the environment or the value of the Great Salt Lake. Like hopefully it helps you step and pay attention to this issue.
Yeah, I think that's well said. We are a 2-newspaper town, and there are some people who read both, but as Leah said, we definitely reach different audiences.
We're very lucky to be a newspaper town, though.
Let's keep it that way. And I think that mirrors some of the political collaboration that's going on, and hopefully that we'll continue to see.
As a Utah native, I think it's like truly incredible to see this sort of collaborative work happening around big issues. I mean, it's amazing. So before we turn this over to some Q&A, I want to know from all three of you what your biggest takeaways were from this project. But then since we're here to talk about solutions, what from that reporting that you've done can you impart on folks gathered here, on residents, on readers, about what they can do to take part in this solutions-based work?
Well, this is a sign we found right outside of the town of Keeler, which is right on the shores of Owens Lake. And I think that sums up their experience. But at the same time, people still stayed in Lee Vining and some of the other towns, Alabama Hills. Parts of it's largely still beautiful. And one thing I've been telling people after this trip is I can really see how people's ability to just adapt to different situations is a blessing and a curse. We're used to air quality issues here in Utah, and we just kind of suck it up. And if you're lucky to not be someone with an acute respiratory or a chronic, respiratory issue, you just kind of deal with it. And so what's a few more days of toxic air, right? I could see how, we will just throw a good respirator in the trunk of your car and carry it with you every day and hope that the dust blows in a different direction to a different town. So I think that is troubling because it can be an impediment to pushing for real change when you can just say, well, it's still really beautiful. It's still worth being here. It's not that big of a deal. It's just 5, 6, 10, 12 days a year.
I kind of have to echo what Spencer said, just because, I think the overall feeling of being there was that, a lot of these people have adapted so well to their surroundings and what's gone on for all these years. And talking to them personally was really kind of emotional for a lot of us, I think, because just hearing their stories of what they've been through, one of them we talked to was a school teacher, and they would literally have to stop recess and make the kids go back inside because the dust was so bad. Like I said, I've worked on hundreds of news stories, and a lot of them had big impact on me. Probably had a lot of impact on me, and it's made me want to talk to my friends more about these issues. This is something that even I myself never thought was such a big deal. And then we go on this trip, and it really kind of opened my eyes on how serious this really is. And so, I think things that anybody can do is just keep the conversation going, really. Just talk to your friends and family, and you don't have to be an alarmist or anything, but it's more like just finding ways to keep that conversation happening, because if it doesn't, then there'll be another issue that happens in a few years and we'll forget about it. Or maybe not forget about it, but maybe just not talk about it as much, and then maybe it's too late at that point. So just keep talking about it. I mean, that's really what's going to keep it at top of mind. Like I said, this is probably easily one of my best, worst stories I've ever worked on in my life, for reals. Like, it's really eye-opening. It was really surreal to see the way Owens Lake was like, and then also with Mona Lake as well. Sorry.
So I know there's a lot of environmental reporters out there who will respond to conversations like this, well, I'm an eternal optimist. I think we can all pull together and solve this problem, and I'm not generally one of those people. And I went out to these lakes, especially Owens Lake, kind of expecting to see this wasteland and this dead lake that everybody talks about. But I actually did emerge from it hopeful. The towns there are thriving. They're doing okay. They got the dust down. They solved the problem. So I mean, whatever direction the Great Salt Lake goes, it can be solved. It can be fixed. It's not going to be the end of the world. It's probably going to cost a lot of money if we decide to go the way of Owens Lake versus Mona Lake. But they've already done the experimenting for us. We already know what we can do. That being said, though, I don't want people to walk away being well, let's not worry then, we can figure it out, because things at the Great Salt Lake are bad. I have a story coming out tomorrow about how the ecological collapse has begun. The brine flies are a huge component of the food web, are gone, essentially, and the few that remain are behaving really strangely. So what does that mean for the birds? I know not everybody cares about birds. We're probably more worried about dust, but birds are kind of a symbol of what's to come for people. So, yeah.
Thanks. So before we turn it over to questions, I just want to kind of piggyback on what everyone up here has said, that this project that we're talking about today, this reporting trip out to California, is just one of many things that this collaborative is doing. There are many other conversations and panels and discussions happening all over northern Utah to address other reporting and stories that are being done. This is just one, while very large, but just one component of the work being done. There's also other things to be able to get involved with. The collaborative is showing up at movies and screenings and other events across the Salt Lake and northern Utah valleys. There's lake tours. There's an incredible wealth of this interactive reporting that is on the Great Salt Lake's website, which is greatsaltlakenews.org, plus appearing on all of the media platforms from all of our news partners. I really encourage you to go and spend time looking at these photos, reading these stories, watching the videos, particularly the pieces that compare where Great Salt Lake was and where it is now. Is incredibly opening to see the drastic changes in the lake, even just over the last year, not even over the last 10 or 20 or 30 years, but the changes that have happened in the last 2 years is truly eye-opening. And the reporting that these folks are doing are showing what that impact is. There's also fun things like trivia nights that they've done in partnership with Utah Public Radio and Logan. So there's a lot of really cool ways to get involved in this, something to fit kind of every preference. And I just encourage you to get involved with that, and then, as Manuel said, to share and talk about it, because it's the best way to bring attention to it and to kind of understand what it means in your life. Of all of us being involved in this, reporting in some way is a big part of the solution. So with that, let's open it up to questions, unless anyone else has something to say. Oh, good, okay. I'll run some mics around, maybe Dirk can help me.
Yeah. To me, the significant thing is all the news organizations basically forming as one giant news organization to cover one huge story. You guys aren't going away anytime soon, are you? And does this collaborative have an end date, or?
I guess it depends on how long the funding lasts. I know they're trying to raise more for more years, so hopefully it's not going away as long as the Great Salt Lake is an issue, would be my hope.
But it's a 2-year project right now, stretching into next year, right?
But they're trying to be sustainable is what Heather told me. It's too bad she's not here, she can answer that question better.
I can answer that a little bit. So it is the funding through the Solutions Journalism Network funds collaborative projects across the country for 2 years. We're wrapping up our first year and we have committed funding from SJN through another year. But that can be supplemented with fundraising from other organizations, from community support, to be able to keep the reporting going on beyond those 2 years and to be able to do more in-depth reporting to this next year as well. So depending on the support that it can get, it will last at least another year, but could expand beyond that and could actually become deeper with additional financial support.
Since agriculture uses about 85% of our available water, what would you recommend to reduce farmer use of water?
Well, we don't really make recommendations as reporters. I can tell you some things that the state is trying to do, and a big one would be split season leases, because as everyone's probably aware, most of that agriculture is used to grow alfalfa, which uses a lot of water, but the good thing about alfalfa is if you stop watering it, it will go dormant, kind of like your grass. So if you just use water in the early part of the season when water is more abundant, got your really good cutting of hay, and the state paid you to let the field go dormant and send that water to the lake, that is something that they're really, really trying hard to do to address that very issue.
I have a mic and a question. I'm just curious about the arsenic, and whether that's a natural feature of the lake bed or whether if humans introduced that to the environment in some way.
That is a really good question, and I'm glad you asked it. So Kevin Perry, the University of Utah professor, has done a lot of the studies on this. He says it's naturally occurring, and that sounds about right because there's arsenic at Owens Lake and on the lake too, so largely natural.
I guess my question, is it my turn?
There you
Hi, Leah. Hi. I think you might know where I'm going with this. I'd like to raise 2 issues. The first is I hope everybody is understanding the difference here between the situation at Owens Lake and Mono Lake, where water was taken out of the basin, versus what we've got going on here. If you stop and think about it, in the Great Salt Lake Basin, we are a closed basin. The water arrives from the sky, either as rain or as snow, and that is the only way it leaves. So, when you have a shower, what evaporates into the air, then when it goes out the window, it heads for Colorado. When you plant a tree, and the tree drinks the water from the soil, and the leaves have evapotranspiration from the surface of the leaves, that water goes to Colorado or Wyoming or wherever eastbound. So every drop of water that is leaving the Great Salt Lake and presenting us with this problem is actually evaporation from one surface or another. And what has happened, and in my view, I may be wrong, but what I'm seeing is that the last 3 or 4 years have been different in that the temperatures have been higher, and when the temperatures are higher, the amount of evapotranspiration off a plant is increased, or any other surface for that matter. And I realized how bad this was getting when I looked at the data I was collecting from streams and groundwater. Not so much the groundwater, but the streams. I was beginning to see daily cycles where the roots of the trees along the stream were sucking up the water, and the amount of water in the stream was decreasing on a daily basis by about a factor of 10% up and down every day when the temperatures were high. And when we had a cool day, that disappeared. So I just ask you to think about that. It is every tree we build, every tree we plant, every lake or artificial fountain we allow to operate. It is every acre of turf, even those acres of turf that make McKay Hospital look beautiful. That is water that is going into the air and heading for Colorado. But what I worry about is not so much this as what goes on under the ground. And I've raised this with Leah, but it's a very difficult thing to get your heads around. If you look on the USGS website, their groundwater watch, you will find that the levels in wells have been dropping steadily for 70 years. And the levels in some of those wells are now close to being below the elevation of Great Salt Lake. And when that happens, the salt water from the lake area is going to come back. So I ask, it's all very well to say, what can we do to fix the lake and talk about resurface solutions, but what are we going to drink in 20 years' time? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think those living on the back maybe sometimes don't feel so connected. That's where we're seeing a lot of the building moratoriums because of water shortages, because of the groundwater. There's not enough groundwater, and so they can't build because of how are they going to have water. So it's all the same system. It's all the same basin, so we're all connected that way.
And obviously, it's not going to get any easier. So it's nice to see a groundswell of interest in working on this now, and let's hope that translates into some meaningful results.
Hi, I have a microphone. I'm incredibly depressed now. You talked about some of the dust mitigation strategies, and you mentioned one came from farmers. Where all did folks go to get dust mitigation strategies, and were there any that just like didn't work over the years?
Yeah.
And are those resources or communities that folks in Utah could go to and kind of pick their brains and find what,
Yeah. I'm surprised they haven't actually, they're not having those conversations, which I think is amazing. Yeah, so you're talking about the mitigation at Owens, yeah. So there were some things they tried, like they had to start from scratch. Nobody had ever mitigated a lake like this before. Nobody had ever seen a man-made source of pollution like this before. So they tried all kinds of things. They tried sand fences, which are kind of like snow fences, that you see along roads that will stop it from blowing, but those aren't as effective as they thought, and they caused issues with migrating wildlife. So that's just one example of something that didn't work. And then some things that worked really well in parts of the lake, like the gravel that they used super lake, well, they went and dumped it in other parts of the lake and it just sunk in. So that was a really expensive experiment. But to your point, I don't know why they're not communicating. If I was at the state of Utah, I maybe would want to give the state of Los Angeles a call and be like, can you send me some studies? I don't know.
And unfortunately, we don't know how the Great Salt Lake would accept different mitigation strategies. Just like on Owens Lake, some mitigation strategies didn't work in certain places. They kind of made the point that they can't just dump water back on it at this point. Parts of the lake bed are not going to just accept that and be stable with the water on top of it at this point. So as much as they've paved the way to some extent with this pretty much unprecedented project, they'll probably have to learn it again if they do it here.
Do you remember how interesting it was when they told us they actually hate it when it rains because it ruins everything and they have to start over?
Yeah, the tillage, it breaks up the tillage. So anytime it rains, they're on the phones, go check the tillage. And, oh, it's still clumping, boss. And all right, good.
But to that point, this is where the community engagement is important. So as you're reading these stories and engaging with this content, if you think of something, pose it to the people who have the opportunity to answer those questions. This team of people who are part of this collaborative are doing amazing work. But the more people we have thinking about these issues, whether they're journalists or not, or scientists or members of the community, it's the brain trust of all of us that will help look to these solutions. So that's what I would like to encourage.
I think another thing that we kept hearing out there when we were doing our interviews was you can't mitigate what you can't measure. And a lot of them were pretty surprised that we don't have dust monitoring stations throughout the lake bed, because Mono Lake, which is, doing a lot better than Owens Lake, still has dust monitoring stations all over the place, so they know when a dust storm picks up where it's coming from, oh yeah, this is actually coming from the lake, not from the nearby desert or this mining operation over here.
Well, Owens has a ton.
not
But
so
doesn't
very-
Mono have like 2 and they're haggling over where they are?
Yes.
Because from Phil Cadou's perspective, put it in the worst spot. Measure the worst dust. From Paul Liu's perspective, why do we want to only measure the worst spot? Look how good it is over there. So
Yeah, so the one station is on the most emissive part of the lake, which is like on the far east end, away from any population centers. And then the other is in Lee Vining, the nearby town that's right on the shore. And so on any given day, you have some of the best air quality in the US and some of the worst. But yeah, the city of LA's point is like, well, nobody is out there on that end of the lake, so why are we measuring it? But yeah.
So I think we have time for about 2 more questions because we had some technical difficulties. If you're willing to stick around, we've got 2 mics out. But please engage with us. You can email the reporters directly if you have questions. You can also reach out to info@greatsaltlakenews.org and talk to our project manager. Keep the conversation going, please. We're on social media, on Instagram and on Facebook. Keep the conversation going if you have questions beyond what we're able to get to now.
Yeah, we love your feedback, so.
So I just had a question. First of all, thank you so much for the work that you're doing, and it's been fantastic to see all the collaborative pieces coming out. I'm curious, you mentioned some radio things. Obviously, you've got photojournalism, you've got television a bit. I'm curious whether you feel like you're reaching as many people as possible, because I know certainly not everybody reads newspapers anymore, and whether literally in print or online. So is there a way to expand, or do you feel like you are expanding into the kind of, I guess, social media realms? I'm certainly not an expert on where people are getting all their news, but I know it's not just newspapers and public radio.
that's a great question. We could always do better, I'm sure. I'm not much of a TikToker, but I hear that's very popular, or if anyone wants to volunteer.
I think that's part of the reason we're here at the library. I think a lot of our events up to this point have been very focused on Salt Lake City, but obviously Salt Lake City is not the only place that is dealing with the downwind impacts of this lake, so that's why we're here. We're going to be in Davis County next week, hoping to get maybe out to Tooele. Yeah, we're trying to go to where people are, but if you have any suggestions, I would love to hear them.
I do know that did good traffic on our website and got a lot of eyes on it.
Everybody loves Ben Winslow's stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love Ben Winslow. He's also, I work with him quite frequently, and he's working really hard to get the message across and, let people know about what's going on. And hopefully some of you guys are watching, even if it's not on Fox 13, it's on KSL. I mean, that's what's great about this collaborative is we're all just working together. There's no real competition when it comes to any of this. And so whatever form you guys are using to get this information, I mean, it's all totally welcome.
And in addition to another library event that we currently have planned, we are going to speak at the Salt Lake Watershed
Salt Lake County Watershed
Symposium, which will be thick with policymakers and people smarter than us, so it's very intimidating.
Doug Fabrizio will be there.
What's that?
Doug Fabrizio.
Yeah, with Doug Fabrizio. So we're hoping to reach a broad population, but also we'll be able to get directly in the ear of some people who can pull some levers and press some buttons and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, the very reason this collaborative is set up with so many different entities who produce content for different platforms is to reach the broadest possible audience. Macaulay Blackburn, who's over here, is one of my students at Salt Lake Community College. She's our beat reporter at The Globe, which is the student organization, so trying to reach into younger audience as well. She has been an intern on the collaborative working with Amplify Utah, which is a project that I started meant to increase representative storytelling. And we're all working together, from nonprofit news organizations to for-profit legacy print newsrooms like the Deseret News, the Salt Lake Tribune, which is the first legacy newspaper in the country to become a nonprofit. Oh my gosh, you guys to become a nonprofit, to all of our broadcast television stations, to our radio stations. It's truly putting our arms around our media landscape as broadly as possible. And then also tapping into as many platforms as we can. So if there's like someone who's great at TikTok, that would be an incredible way to pull in like a 13 to 40-year-old audience.
I think she's signing up for the job.
Yeah. Do you want a TikTok? We could hire an intern to the back, and then we'll end with you.
Yeah, so one of the things that was talked about was the differences between, Mona Lake or Owens Lake and the court system against, Los Angeles, that they had to deal with that through the courts. Whereas I think maybe Salt Lake's a little bit different because it is literally our backyard that we're dealing with here. Could you please comment on how you would see that being a difference or similarities there and how that could impact our ability to have an impact on the lake?
Through the courts, you mean?
No, just through the community instead of having to go through the courts, being able to do it without this legal measure to it. Or legality.
Well, I think they were saying they don't know who to go after. Like, there's nobody to go after. So it's like, who do you take to court? That's the big question. Yeah, I mean, Phil and LA Water Power, I mean, they were all kind of saying the same thing to us.
And as Leah mentioned, there was a lot of support or dissent, I suppose, within Los Angeles about when they saw what had happened so that they could have this water. People in LA were pissed. And so we have, luckily, a big population right here where the problem is happening. We don't have to rely on people 200 miles away finding out about it and being upset. We have all of you that live right alongside the lake. So I guess that's probably one of the big benefits and differences that we have is that we have a large population that will be directly affected and aren't just going to have to be altruistic to care about it.
Well, and to that community point, we have seen the community step up. I'm amazed, just like the amount of water we've cut this season compared to last year is like remarkable. So much so that 2 of our water districts are going to send 30,000 acre feet to the lake by the end of the year, just, like largely due to our conservation. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot because the Great Salt Lake needs like 2 million acre feet, but it all adds up, it all helps. And I would also say that I know a lot of these people ripping out their grass and trying to make changes are frustrated because they look at how much water the farmers use and they're like, what's the point of even trying? But I would here to say it does make a difference. Everything adds up. Also, one thing I really noticed on this trip is this like large urban-rural divide and how it kind of pitted against each other. I hope that's not what we want as a state. Agriculture supports rural economies, and rural economies matter. So hopefully, instead of feeling pitted against each other, we are able to join together maybe and search for solutions that help everybody.
Okay. We have one more question over here to end up.
What can younger people, like not adults, I guess, do to help with the whole dust water things like that?
I think that you have the benefit of having this front of mind while you're at a younger age, and you can grow up with this mindset of conservation being part of your culture. So when you get of age to vote and when you are out in the community, you can just keep that alive with everyone else and make sure that that's a priority for your peers.
Yeah, I mean, talk to your peers about it. If you care about what you learned about today and what you're seeing, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking? Talk to all of your 13-year-old friends. Talk to everyone in your class. Talk to their younger and older siblings. Tell them what you're learning and get them engaged and passionate about being part of this project. Share a story that you liked with them. Share a video that you saw with them. Go check us out on Instagram, and if there's a story that you saw there or a post there that you liked, share it to your own page. Let people know about it.
I just saw that like 60% of millennials and Gen Z are expected to vote in this midterm election, and that's kind of pathetic. So when you turn 18, make sure you're voting.
And I would say one of the most inspiring stories that I covered this year was a group of students who held like a mock funeral for the lake, all organized by students, like high school age students. And just like their drive and their determination was so powerful. And I think when the adults look at this and they realize how much their actions are going to affect the generation coming up, it really shakes them, and it, you know, like they're listening, they're paying attention. So
That was an incredible story. If you haven't read that, I highly encourage you to read it. And if it motivates you, talk to some of your science teachers or to your mentors at school and see how you can engage them. How can you engage your class to do a project that is from you?
And us news outlets loved that event. And so if you come up with some cool idea to promote these causes, give a call to our newsrooms and say, hey, we're going to do this cool thing. Can you send a photographer out?
Thank you, everyone. Macaulay, you have something to say?
Yes, I just wanted to add on to what Marcy said. If anybody has a question we weren't able to answer there, the lovely reporters up there weren't able to answer, you can go to greatsaltlakenews.org, scroll down to our questions and answers, and take the survey. You can tell us what's important to you to learn about, and also ask a direct question that you want to have answered by experts.
And that's what Macaulay is answering every week. She has spent the last 6 months answering the questions submitted by folks from across the state and the valley. Let's pick up some stars. This is, I think we named him Bryony. Did that stick? What's that? Bryony? I don't know. Some of us named this guy Bryony. It's a Brian Trim sticker designed by the Salt Lake Tribune's Pat Bagley. Picks them up. There's flyers in the back. You can sign up for our newsletter at Salt Lake News, greatsaltlakenews.org, and stay on top of what we're doing. But thank you for coming out today.
Thanks for coming. Thank you.